As a gardener, it can be really stressful to be away from your garden, even if it's just for a couple days, especially in the summer, and especially if you're somebody like me who can't run drip irrigation and who might not have somebody reliable who can come and take care of your garden in your absence. So I'm going to share my tips for how to keep your garden happy on its own while you're away. These tips that I'm about to give are really just for short vacations or trips for about a week or less, but for longer vacations, you'd likely be better off really trying to find someone to tend to your garden if you don't have drip irrigation. A common question that I get is why I don't run drip irrigation, but for me it's more like why I can't run drip irrigation, and it's because of the amount of slab I have leading out to my raised beds. I can't bury the main lines, and I don't want lines all over the place. Also, our weather can be inconsistent. There are splitters that can be controlled by your phone on Bluetooth like this one. I got it a while ago and it's been sitting out in my shed for a long time, which is why it's so dirty. But for the sake of going away on vacation, I don't want to have to keep checking the weather at home and making adjustments. And sometimes our Wi-Fi isn't reliable, so if I'm not home, that would worry me that I can't fix the issue. Luckily, most plants don't need to be watered every single day, but some of your plants might still need water while you're gone. Deep watering your plants right before you leave is a good start. Giving them enough water to last them a bit, even if it seems like you might be overwatering them, is likely going to be fine if they won't be getting any other water for a few days. I'm also a fan of using oyas, which are terracotta vessels that you bury in the ground and then you fill them with water so that water slowly seeps out at the root level of plants. You can also use these terracotta watering spikes, which are very similar. You just put them into the soil and then you fill a bottle with water, turn it upside down, and then put it into the terracotta watering spike. If you're going to be using either of those things, I would suggest that you do your deep watering first, because then if the soil is already wet before you fill them up, the water won't start to seep out until the soil dries out a bit. Another thing you can use are these attachments that fit on standard sized bottles that you fill up with water, and then you can adjust the drip rate and water will drip out slowly. Unlike the terracotta oyas or spikes though, it will release water no matter how wet or dry the soil is, but if you want to make sure the soil doesn't dry out for a few days, these can be helpful. You can also use water globes like these, however, they shouldn't pull water out too quickly if the soil is pretty damp, so that might be a better option than the attachments. But I suggest plastic water globes since water in glass when exposed to high temperatures can burst into flames, and a fire is the last thing you want when you're away. You could also take bottles of water and poke holes through the caps and turn them upside down, or cut a small hole or slit on the sides of the bottles and lay the bottles down over an area of plants that you want to be watered. Again, like the attachments, the water will seep out regardless of the moisture levels in the soil, but it can still help keep the soil hydrated for a few days. Next, move all containers to the shade. While plants do need some sun, they won't be in total darkness in the shade, and temporarily it should be fine. For in-ground plants or raised beds, if the temperatures are going to be pretty hot, or if there's even going to be a heat wave while you're gone, you might want to consider shade cloth over your plants. Even if there isn't going to be a heat wave, the shade cloth can help keep the soil hydrated because the water won't be able to evaporate as quickly if your plants are covered. Mulching can also help with moisture retention in the soil. I do hate mulching personally due to pest pressure, but if I have more mature plants, then I am willing to take that risk to make sure that the soil doesn't dry out. And just like the oyas or the watering stakes, I recommend doing your deep watering first, then adding the mulch to lock in that moisture, and if you wanted to, you could add a little bit more water on top of the mulch. Ideally, if you know that you're going out of town, you wouldn't be starting new seeds or have young seedlings before you leave. But if for some reason you did, because you're like me and you just can't help yourself, you can take a container like this one and place the seedlings or sown seeds in and add a few inches of water. The water will come up through the drainage holes on the bottom and keep them from drying out while you're gone, as long as there is still enough water in that container. I'm a big fan of using what you have, but I still wanted to mention these because they can be helpful if you're going out of town. Self-watering planters. In self-watering planters, there are essentially no drainage holes, but there is a basin of water that you fill up that will usually have what are called wicking cells on the bottom of the planter that allows more water to come through to the soil when it's dry. But if you don't already have self-watering planters, don't feel like you need to run out and get some unless you are planning on potting some plants up anyways, or just keep them in mind for the next time you do buy planters. All right, I am headed out for my trip. Wish my garden luck. I'm back from my trip and I was gone for roughly 4 days, so let's see how my garden fared without me. Everything looks great. I actually didn't cover up my tomato plants because it was only going to be 89 degrees to 90 degrees while I was gone. The loofah has grown a little bit in the time that I was gone, so that's exciting to see. And I see a lot of new tomatoes ripening up, so that's also very exciting. While I didn't prep for this, I am very happy to see that this sunflower survived the wrath of the squirrels who love to come and decapitate all of my sunflowers. And I'm seeing that I've got a lot of peppers ready to harvest. This jug was too big for the terracotta watering spike, but my squash and my corn look great. And then I have another spike here that has a little bit of water left in it. That nasturtium to the right was already dead before I left on vacation. And this squash right here is looking pretty happy as well. I know it's hard to see inside, but I was curious to see how much water was left in my oyas. And in these larger ones, there's still a little bit of water left. And the plants that I put in this container full of water are looking great. The mint that I put in here was looking very sad before I put it in here. So it even looks better than when I left for vacation. And the rest of my container plants looked like they held up. I also came home to my first ripe cucumber of the year. And speaking of my cucumbers in containers, there is still a lot of water left in the bottles that I put in the terracotta watering spikes. I definitely think it's safe to say that doing everything that I did helped my garden hold up on its own. Now, I know I said that this video was for people who didn't have drip irrigation or someone who could come and water plants for them. I thought my mom wasn't going to be able to, but she actually was able to come to the garden for one of the days that I was gone. However, she didn't need to water anything. So even if she couldn't come to check on the garden still would have been just fine.